My three mantras are anything is possible, education is the solution to almost everything, and of course my main message is never be a victim, because life has all kinds of bumps. The road of life is always under construction, and if you come to a bump, the most important thing is to not focus on that, but focus on what's next.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Okay, everybody. So there's a line in Ed Hajim's book that stopped me cold. He writes, "My childhood disadvantages became advantages in later life." Not, "I overcame my disadvantages," not, "I succeeded despite my disadvantages." He said they became advantages. So that's either denial or enlightenment. On today's episode, the show where we don't settle for surface level success stories, we dig into transformation, the moments where everything could have gone wrong, but somehow went right. And Ed Hajim is one of those people entirely. And his book, On the Road Less Traveled, isn't just his story, it's a blueprint for anyone who's starting from behind and wondering if they'll ever catch up. So, without further ado, Ed, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun to be here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around, because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You definitely have a very fascinating background, and you triumphed through it all, so I think our audience is in for a treat today. And I guess I just have to start off by asking about yourself before we dive into the book a bit. I mean, you had a very, unfortunate experience when you were just 3 years old. You were kidnapped, actually. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What do you remember from that experience?
I must say, when I started to write the book, it almost seemed like fiction, because I'd saved every letter that my father written me, and he'd saved every letter that I wrote him. So I had some pretty good stuff. And in writing books, and waiting as long as I decided to wait until I was in my 70s before I wrote it, you had to sort of compare fact with what you remember. And but that was something very, those things you do remember. My father and mother got divorced when I was 3 years old. My father's story is even more interesting than part of my story. But anyway, they got divorced, and she got custody of me and took me from Los Angeles to St. Louis. He couldn't do without me, so he had visiting rights on Sunday and $5 a week of alimony and child support. He drove the 1,800 miles, took about 3 days in those days, to St. Louis. Instead of taking me to a movie or to the park on a Sunday, he headed back on Highway 66, which is the front of the book, and took me back to Los Angeles, called my mother and said, "Don't look for us, or else," quote unquote. And that started my life off. I guess subsequently, or somewhere during there, he told me my mother had passed away and that I would never see her. I never saw a picture of her. So that started my life off. Dad was a merchant marine aboard a ship. He was a radio operator, so he wasn't in port very often. So I stayed with friends and neighbors. We had no family. And when the war started, he got drafted, or he volunteered. He was 41 years old with a child. I'm not sure that they would draft him, but he took a commission in in Merchant Marines and put me into the Catholic welfare system in Los Angeles. And that started my Ejira. That started my trip of 5 foster homes, the YMCA on 34th Street, hotels in Coney Island, and then finally 2 orphanages. Until I finally saw the light of day when I was about 18 years old.
Right. Well, wow, that is definitely something that does sound like a movie or fiction piece of work. And I'm just hurt that you had to go through that. I mean, especially because throughout all that, you had to live in like 15 to 20 different locations growing up. And, that must have been just like so difficult to adapt and find those survival instincts throughout different foster homes and orphanages. And, here you are now, though, just thriving. I mean, from what I see here, you end up with a scholarship to the University of Rochester, which is a great turning point. Tell us a little bit about that and how you kind of evolved from all those experiences.
Well, all these so-called disadvantages that you spoke about early on, and you mentioned the magic word adaptability. When I was 11 years old and we were in Coney Island, my father finally got a job after getting out of the Navy, the Merchant Marines. The war was over. He had trouble getting land-based work. So he finally got a job back on a ship again, and he put me with a neighbor. At the last minute, he decided, she decided she didn't want to take me. So he looked at me and he said, I was 11 years old. He said, "You'll stay here in the hotel. Here's money. I've set up a local delicatessen to feed you." Well, I had to adapt. And, becoming adaptable is a real advantage. No matter what happened all through my life, whether I was in a schoolyard at a Catholic school or in a hotel in Coney Island or in an orphanage, I adapted. So later on in my business life, when something came up that was difficult, I could easily adapt. But the second orphanage was in Yonkers, New York, and the first orphanage was actually the first time I really got community and consistency. For 2.5 years, I stayed in one place. I went to a very good public grammar school. I did pretty well, but my father then disappeared on me. That's a very long story. Not his fault, but he did disappear, and I became a ward of the state. Went to the second orphanage, which turned out to be close to a very fine high school, public high school, where 80% of the kids went to college, something called a private college. So I decided that was my ticket out of my circumstance. So I worked very hard, became a varsity athlete. I did well in math and science and got the NRTC scholarship to the University of Rochester. And I could see then, from there I could make it. I could have the white picket fence and the wife and the 3 children. So, that was, I could see it at that point in time. I just had to work hard. It still wasn't easy because, you arrive at the University of Rochester in a leather jacket with all the wrong clothes. And, the first week is rush week and you get rejected by all the fraternities. But, that again, being adaptable, the food was better. And instead of being a place with lots of guys, I had one roommate and it was a nice place. So getting rejected didn't bother me. And, after 12 months of cutting my hair and buying a tweed coat and playing basketball and baseball, freshman year, I got pledged by most of the fraternities on campus my sophomore year. So I was only a year behind. So, and that was the beginning. And again, I took at 18 years old, and I tell this to people when I give talks, you have a choice. That's my second book, The Island of the 4 Ps, arriving on an island. You arrive at a college or a new job, and you can bury the last 18 years if you want to, or you can let it hang out. And I decided to bury it. And I buried it. My father was a merchant marine. We lived in a post office box in San Francisco. My mother died when I was 3. End of story. I never told my story. And so I became, actually it was kind of, some of the girls thought I was kind of interesting because I was dark, I was different than the rest of the guys. But it was a hard deal. But I buried that for my entire life. Even my wife didn't know the whole story, and the kids didn't. And that's one reason I wrote the book, is that they finally, in my 70s, they said, "Dad, we want to know the whole story." And so I had to go back and dig it out. And then when I became the chairman of the board of trustees at the University of Rochester, I tried to give them a gift anonymously. They said, no, we need you. We need your background. And they started to dig around and they started to find out some things. And so I decided to write the book, and it was a great experience. Took me a while though.
Well, wow. I mean, I love that story about how it seems to almost have fallen into your lap. Like you just kind of saw the university, and that was kind of like the hope to say, like, what, I can get out of this. I just have to work hard and get there. And yeah, you took each of those. I mean, just like I said in the introduction, you took those disadvantages and they became your advantages in a way, So it's just beautiful that you're able to do so and be so resilient. And I think that people have just a ton to learn from that. And so I think it's really great that you also decided to write a book and to share your story publicly. You mentioned a little bit about your choice to do so, about how it was time to just kind of tell the truth and share this with your family. But was there a certain catalyst that made you say it's time to write the book?
Well, it was in my 70s. I had a couple of problems. The University of Rochester said, you can be chairman of the board. If you want to give a major gift, we got to know more about you. And then a couple of guys started digging around in my background. They started to find out a few things. And then Horatio Alger, when I got selected to become a Horatio Alger awardee, they really opened it up. And if I wanted to be an awardee, I had to tell the whole story to the world. And so, but prior to that, my daughter and my 2 sons and my wife said, we really think you should write this because we like to have it for history. So I was going to write a book basically for the family. I was going to print 100 copies and give it to the family and call it a day. I sent out 15, blurbs, and 12 of them came back and said, no, you have to share this with the world because you can prove the one thing you've always believed, that anything is possible. And this book does prove it, that I live the American dream. And, I can inspire young people and so forth. And that's sort of, I sat around thinking about it, that, I've always been a very private person. In fact, I lived under the mantra for Wall Street, to live happy is to live hidden. And I felt I did that way. I was the CEO of an investment bank, but I didn't appear on television. I was rarely in magazines. I never went to the newspaper. I worked on being the CEO and running the company, not being a public individual. Well, this was going to require me to become, a public person, talk to people like you, do podcasts, go on Instagram, yuck. Even they've been talking to me, they're going on TikTok. I haven't done that yet, but Instagram and LinkedIn, all the social media, I did none of that. I'm just starting off. Being a non-celebrity, it's not an easy thing to do, but I found this great deal of satisfaction. And I always believe what I call flow. There's always a next thing you do in life. And this seems to me the wonderful pivot for a person in my position. And I'm getting very good response. So I decided to hire a publicist and see what happened. And I'm finding a very good response. People say, hey, you do have a good story to tell. And it does inspire people. And I by the way, along as I wrote it and everything else, because this particular program, you learn a lot about yourself when you write down things. You learn a lot about your relationships. I thought I knew pretty much about how I reacted to my father, what kind of relationship we had, but as I wrote it all down, I forgave him more and more and more. I kind of understood. Because I wrote the book, I got into his shoes. I understand his problems, and I accepted him. I did all through my life. It was a peaceable coexistence. Because he rejected everything that I did, we didn't have a wonderful relationship. But as I wrote the book, I realized how difficult his life was and why he did a lot of things he did. So, I think writing a book is very healthy for people, and it was very good for me. But more importantly, the book, I think, and my life can inspire young people to realize that my three mantras are: anything is possible, education is the solution to almost everything, not everything, and never be a victim. And I've carried that through my whole life. And the third one is very important because so many people waste a lot of time being a victim. And if you use the energy from being a victim to base the title of my third book, What's Next? Focus on what's next, which is hard enough. And if you focus on what's next, you can possibly accomplish that. And you'll see in my book and in my life, in many respects, there were problems when it was my fault, but I focused on what next. So I took the next step. And then later on in life, it wasn't my fault. I didn't focus on, Lehman Brothers, I did everything right. I changed 2 divisions. I made them profitable, but the boss hated me. It was in the book, said Glucksman hated Hajim. So he threw me out, or he pushed me out. I didn't have to go, but did push me out. I didn't focus on fighting him. I worked what's next, and I found my dream job. And I continue that. And maybe this whole book writing thing and talking to people like you is what's next right now. Getting a terrific kick out of it. The books have taken me to the point where I produced a course, and that course is now being taught in 8 schools. So I'm going to take it. I have a crusade, but I've gotten off your question. I'm sorry, but I've got a crusade now. I want to add a dimension to university education, which basically says we want to find out about you. I want to understand your passions, your principles, the kind of partners you want. And I want to know your plans. I want that in the freshman year. I want you to be able to write that down formally. We did it. We did it in the dining rooms. We did it in the fraternity houses. We did it in the dormitories. But I want kids to formally think about who they are, where they want to go, how they expect to get there, and what are they going to test during those 4 years in a real life, not only in the classroom. So I've started that, and it's taken. I mean, one of the schools has 200 kids in it right now, 11 sections. Another one is a required course for freshmen. So, and it's presumptuous. I mean, it's not something that you say to universities, we think you're doing it wrong, but it's something that I think I can get a big kick out of, especially in today's complex world. I mean, more opportunity than ever was before, but it's a hell of a lot more complex. And I'll stop. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I love it when people, kind of let their train of thought go because you were able to touch upon a lot of stuff that we might not have otherwise. I mean, we're chatting about the book itself, but I love that you kind of branched into what comes next because that was one of my later on questions I would have loved to hear about. So I'm glad that you're taking your experiences and the success from the book and going forward with it, trying to make some change in, the university life so that people who are in your shoes can maybe benefit as well later on. So it's beautiful that you've done that. Um, and I guess I do want to circle back a little bit to the writing process because we are an Authors on Mission podcast. We're here to support the writers. So I'm curious to know, I mean, one thing that stuck with me among everything that you mentioned was the idea that you learned about yourself while writing, which I think is really cool. But you also had a co-author too. So I'm curious to know how that worked and that dynamic.
Well, the co-author, they were ghostwriters, really. They weren't.
Oh, okay.
They're
So
ghostwriters. They're ghost. But then you get in exchange for the ghostwriter. I had three of them. Each of them added to me. The first woman was fabulous. She wrote 8 bestsellers, but she tried to add too much drama to my life. I had enough drama. She wanted more. She wanted me to hate my things like that. I said, no, I want to produce the truth. I want to, because this was a document for my family at that time. And then the last ghostwriter just did a very good job of making it readable. Being an engineer, I wasn't the greatest writer in the world. And he took it and made it readable. And he made the second. My first book was written by a fellow at Harvard. And we spent every Saturday together for 2 years. And I created a fable because in my life, fables have taught me an awful lot. Gulliver's Travels, Who Moved My Cheese, a modern one, even The Grinch, but Aesop's Fables. So I decided to write a fable because I think it's more digestible. And then from that fable has come my course because I wanted to communicate to young people what they should be doing and what they are already doing, but do it a little more formally. So but you really, when you start writing down, you really learn about yourself and you learn about your relationships because writing is really the only form of definite communications. Thinking is fuzzy, talking is fuzzy. When you start writing things down and you try to communicate a thought to someone, you write something down. This is the thought I want to communicate. Then you ask the person, is that what you think I'm thinking about? They say, well, no, it's not exactly. And then you got to redo it and so forth. That's why it's such a difficult process.
Understood. No, I get that. So it's interesting that you had to kind of go through a couple different ghostwriters to find the one that matched best, but you do seem to gain it from each experience as well. So that's something that a lot of authors can learn from too, is the idea of finding the people to work with that are right for you and that best benefit you. I love all those tips you offered as well. It's tremendous there. Um, so I'm curious, now that this story is public, I mean, how has it changed your life? Do you have any regrets about opening up, or has it been liberating? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's been great for me. It's a chance. Well, again, in your lifetime, you do different things. And at certain points, I believe in Levinson, the golden stages of man's life. This is what I should be doing, is trying to communicate and help people to maybe round out some of the early bumps in their life. And if I can do that, it brings enormous satisfaction. And I think, so this is the right thing to do. I wasn't comfortable at first with going public. And my daughter was scared to death that somebody would come out of my past and have something awful on me. But most of the skeletons in my closet are dead, so that's good. I'm old enough, so I haven't made many mistakes. But it's when you go public, it's a little scary, because the people will dig up something about you that you probably wouldn't be proud of knowing about. We all did some things we probably would not like to make public. But I have found the satisfaction of going to schools and communicating with young people and having young people say to me, that's something I really can do. I can find out about myself. In other words, I bring the revelation, which in my mind is a revelation that came to me, that, you are a combination of your genes and your environment. And until
Right.
you're 18, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, you have no control over who you are. No control, none. No control over your genes, no control over your environment, no control over your family. Somewhere in that 17 to 22 or so forth, you wake up one morning and saying, this is who I am. And these are the things that I have. These traits I really like to keep and expand. These traits maybe I want to, get rid of or at least decrease. And these are the traits I want to add. But you start to get control of your life and to communicate to the young people. They say, yeah, aha, you're right. And if I'm, if, for example, learning as a young man that I was angry, I had a lot of all these disadvantages were wonderful, but there were some disadvantages that weren't good. I turned out to be angry, and I had to understand that. As soon as I understood that, I could control it. And that's basically what I want to communicate to young people, to find out about themselves. Each person's different. They're all unique. And what parts of themselves do they want to keep, get rid of, add? It's an interesting process. And you don't need to cross to everybody. There's still some guys still want to drink beer and chase women, and that's okay too. I did some of that, but I think that others that really want to seriously try to cope with, their own life in society. And there's a 30-40% of the people, young people I talk to, really lean forward and say, yeah, that's something I want to learn about.
Understood. Well, that's just beautiful that you said that. And it all kind of ties back to your core message of the idea of like finding yourself, but being resilient through it. And I think that ties into everything you just mentioned as well. It also makes me think of the idea in your book, kind of that theme of having an inner voice, like kind of following the inner voice. It's something I noticed that you talk about a lot. And I think that ties into what you were just saying as well. I'm wondering if you would chat about that for a little bit. I mean, when did you first become aware of your inner voice, and how does that guide you today and learning more about yourself, as you were talking about?
That's one of the discoveries that I made. People say there's only two constants, death and taxes, which is totally incorrect, because some people never pay taxes, and death only happens once, so it's not a constant. There are two constants in life. One is your inner voice, starts from the day you're born to the day you pass away, and change. And the game plan for most people in most life, if they recognize it, is having their inner voice capable of handling change. Now, how do you do that? I basically say you build a framework or a vocabulary for a conversation with your inner voice, because you really make all your decisions with you and your inner voice. You may talk to somebody, you may have a group of people who help you out, but you come back to that conversation with yourself. And I want to give young people a framework for that conversation, a simple vocabulary, which is find your passions, find your principles, find your partners, and write your plans. And recognize there are 4 parts of life: self, family, work, and community. Community, my word for giving back. And basically, those 8 words, in my mind, are vocabulary. There's many other words that will really get you through most decisions well. The reason I say that is I went back and looked at the yellow pads when I made key decisions in my life, and those words kept popping up. Now, they came in different forms, but I've tried to distill them so that they basically are simple and easy to handle. Then each person takes those and adds their uniqueness to it. They may have some other, for example, at Sacred Heart, when they're teaching this, there's more emphasis on principles because of the religious background of the school. And other people will have more emphasis on partners because that's the way they live their lives. But in a sense, that's what I try to do. But your inner voice to me is so important. And you get that inner voice down on paper, what it's thinking about, how it's handling things, and why it's thinking the way it is. So it's maybe one of the few. There's nothing new under the sun. Maybe one of the few uniquenesses which I've focused on in my work. But I do want to give that inner voice that vocabulary.
Of course. Yeah, I love that. And thank you for getting us through that. I think it's important for readers to understand that's such a huge part of your book as well, along with the resilience in your story and everything in between. So I appreciate that. So yeah, I mean, we know you have a lot of exciting projects coming up with the university and the speaking, but if people want to stay in touch and, get up to date with what you're doing, where's the best places for people to find you? You mentioned Instagram and TikTok, I guess. What are some of those things?
I have a pretty robust website, which starts you off, but the gal who handles my Instagram has done a great job. We're up to 200 and 300 posts, and we've got one. Montel Williams, my interview guy, has now 280,000 visits, which I think I don't know what that means. I'm shocking there's that many, but she's posted a lot of stuff. Every week, every couple of weeks, she posts something else. She draws something out of one of my books or one of my conversations and puts it on Instagram. But the website is pretty robust. It has all kinds of stuff in it and so forth. And if you go to what's nice about Hajim is there aren't many Hajims in the world. In fact, we haven't found any other. So if you just type my name into either, any place, you'll find out all my stuff that I've done and so forth. They've done a good job of putting everything down there. Nothing was there 4 years ago, and now it's pretty robust. There's lots of background. I did at the university. I was the chairman for 8 years, and they did name a school after me. I was very proud of that because this way, thousands of kids have to learn how to pronounce my name correctly, which is important. So, I did found a golf course in Nantucket, which again, really lucky and very proud of that. We now have 25 scholarships a year come out of that golf course. We're the largest charity on the island, and so that's a unique experience for anyone. So I've been lucky enough to sort of do a lot of different things and succeed and fail in a lot of different things. So I have a lot of bit of experience to communicate and possibly, I say, just round off some of those early bumps that people have. I just talked to a young man at University of Arizona just before I got on this thing, and he's thinking about the financial industry. I try to narrow him down into where he really should head and tell him he doesn't have to come to New York initially. He may be better off working in Arizona and so forth. So we had a conversation. It was a good conversation. Because of the book, because of stuff that I'm doing, I'm getting these kinds of referrals, and it's fun. I've done this pretty much all my life. All my later life, being involved in the university, you get a lot of young people that want to talk to you, so it's kind of fun. And I have a lot of scholarship students. That's my philanthropy is in scholarships, because changed my life. I want to change people's life. That nexus right at 17 to 20, when a little bit of, resources, a little bit of funds, a little bit of money can get you over that hump, allow you to do what you take that next step, which is very important. And my poster child is a young lady who's 5 foot high, and he was a optical engineering major. She now gotten her PhD, and she stood on the podium one afternoon in front of a bunch of people and said, "If it wasn't for Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here." Well, my fourth part of life community, that took care of everything I've ever done in my life, just changing her life by letting her become a PhD in optical engineering. Now she's married, she's got a child, she's teaching and working for a company. And that's just a great thing. So the old story, if you change one life, you've done a good job with yours.
Right. Well, that's incredible. And I'm so glad to know that, you didn't just stop with your own successes and your own triumphs. You've been sharing the love and successes with others through your book, through all these endeavors you just mentioned. And that's incredible. And I think everybody listening today can take a page from your book and learn to do the same. I mean, clearly you're making an impact and taking what you went through as an experience to teach others and help others. So I love it. Um, Guys, if this is something that really resonates with you, go ahead and check out On the Road Less Traveled. It's, something that we can all learn from, through one story or another in Ed's journey. I'm sure it's something we could all help them. I mean, especially if you've ever felt like the deck is stacked against you, this is a perfect example. So, Ed, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing more about it with us.
Well, thank you, Danielle. It's very good. Your questions help it move right along. It's a two-way conversation.
Yeah. And I think we covered a ton. We were able to chat about the book, but also about everything else that you are doing to help make a difference, which is something that authors need to understand. Writing is not just writing a book and putting it on the shelf, but it's using it as a tool to inspire change, to inspire people's own optimism and outlook on life in this case, right? So amazing work what you're doing here. So very much admire it.
Thank you very much. That's very, very, very kind of you.
I'm wondering if you have any last thoughts for the audience before we wrap up today.
I think you should probably take the 3 mantras is that anything is possible, and education is a solution. In fact, I recommend to people that young people today will probably they'll all live to 100. So somewhere in their life, they may have to pivot and actually go back to education full time. And of course, my main message is never be a victim, because life has all kinds of bumps. The road of life is always under construction. And if you come to a bump, the most important thing is to not focus on that, to focus on what's next and to use your energy in that direction. And I've proven that a number of times. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's very difficult, but with that, there's just a certain amount of energy and use it on what's next.
Right. I love that. And those are some beautiful mantras that we can all learn from. I appreciate it. And guys, if you want to learn more about those, well, we're going to put the links to all of Ed's content in the description box of this podcast today, so you can click on over and get in touch. And until next time, keep writing your story, keep walking your road, and remember that sometimes the road less traveled is one that's exactly where you need to go. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast. That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.